This engine uses a connecting rod to drive the camshaft. Is it really useful? In 1958, the NSU car brand, which today belongs to Volkswagen Audi, launched this engine, where instead of using a belt, chain, a group of gears, or on the other hand, placing the camshaft below with a gear and using push rods and rocker arms to control the valves, it used a connecting rod system. This system was called Ultramax, and since then, 900,000 engines were manufactured with this configuration. What would happen if aluminum connecting rods were used today, or better yet, carbon fiber? Could this be better than a chain or belt? Let's take a closer look at how this NSU engine works and whether it's actually better or not. First, we have a crankshaft with this shape. It uses a counterweight in the middle and is capable of driving two connecting rods. These connecting rods are attached to pistons. Above these are the spark plugs. And then we have one intake valve and one exhaust valve per cylinder. These valves have return springs and are actuated through rocker arms, which at the same time are managed by a single camshaft. It performs intake, compression, combustion, and exhaust. As we see, the two cylinders go up and down at the same time. This is because it's an engine that fires the spark every 360 degrees. Remember that a four-stroke engine needs 720 degrees to complete a cycle. This means that every time the pistons move up, there's at least one combustion to power the engine. If the pistons were 180 degrees out of phase, we would have two combustions in a row and then a lot of dead time while the cylinders reload. On the plus side, there would be better balance and less internal losses, since the gases under the pistons in the crankcase could pass through each other. In the 360 degrees, the gases in the crankcase compresses. Returning to our exotic engine with Ultramax timing, the camshaft has two eccentric circles, and it rotates at half the crankshaft speed. That's the reason why below, a gear with double the size is used to reduce the speed. This gear is connected to another shaft that also has two eccentric circles. Now we add one long connecting rod that will transmit the movement upwards. But there's a problem. When running at a low engine speed or at startup, the valve spring will bounce the camshaft and start rotating backwards. The lower shaft always rotates in the same direction, but the upper one has the possibility of rotating well or remaining oscillating in one half. Clearly, the engine would stop working since the gases would move in the opposite direction and no mixture would enter. To prevent this from happening, we're going to add another connecting rod. If we place it at 180 degrees to the first one, exactly the same thing would happen. So we're going to place it at only 90 degrees. With this way, we'll make sure that it works properly. To compensate for this 90-degree imbalance, our camshaft must have a counterweight. The upper part is mounted on a floating system with a small tolerance that can move up or down. This third connecting rod links the lower and upper parts, and being next to the other two moving connecting rods, it undergoes the same thermal expansion, so it increases or decreases the height of the camshaft to allow the two moving connecting rods to expand freely and not jam. NSU manufactured more than 900,000 engines using the Ultramax system, of which 150,000 were for motorcycles, some of them race winners. This car, built in 1958, with two cylinders and 600 cubic centimeters, produced 35 horsepower at 5,500 RPM. The engine has a 76mm bore and 66mm stroke. It's over square. The compression ratio is 7.5 to 1. It is rear-mounted and air-cooled. The starter motor, after starting the engine, worked as a dynamo and charged the battery. The system was called Dynastart and was invented in Germany. Compared to the 1960 Fiat 600, which had 4 cylinders and was water-cooled, it produced only 25 horsepower at 4,600 RPM. That is 10 horsepower less than the NSU. The NSU was a faithful competitor to the Beetle, which, despite having 4 cylinders and twice the displacement, although it runned at less RPM, produced only 5 extra horsepower than the NSU. In response to this, as NSU was stealing many of its sales with several of its projects, Volkswagen decided to buy NSU. But seeing that the connecting rod method also had many parts such as the thermal expansion system and complexity, in addition to a higher manufacturing cost, VW decided to stop the production of this engine, leaving it in oblivion. Along with this, other projects such as the engine that powers the NSU Spider and on which Felix Wankel himself was working with the rotary engine also died. But let's go back to the little two-cylinder. Is the connecting rod timing system really better? Initially, engines had gears, the camshaft at the bottom, and then there were push rods that went up to the valves. This system was very reliable, but having one rod per valve adds a lot of weight. The two-rod system reduces it. In addition, the valve spring must push the valve itself and also the push rod. As a consequence, this severely limits the maximum number of revolutions, as the valve will no longer follow the cam and will float until the spring manages to push the assembly back. During this time, gases can escape undesirably and the engine performance will drop drastically. For this reason, pushrod engines are only good for low RPM. Thanks to this, the NSU engine could spin at 5,000 RPM. This is considerably faster than its competitors, and by refilling its cylinders with fresh mixture twice as often in the same time, the power increases. In theory, rotating at twice the RPM means having twice the displacement, which explains why this little engine had so much power, although obviously at the cost of greater wear. The gearbox was located inside the engine block at the back. A gear came out from the crankshaft that connected to the clutch and the gearbox shafts, very similar to that of a motorcycle. This made the engine very light. A fan provided air while the engine was running. With its low weight and high power, this engine pushed the NSU Prinz to over 60 miles or 100 kilometers per hour. Really fast for that time. Now, what happened to the connecting rod system? If we compare this to other engines that use multiple gears to go up, we can see that the weight of so many gears turning would be bad. Plus, we have to consider that all the gears would have to be replaced when they wear out. Also, with so many gear teeth touching, they would produce noise like racing gearboxes, not to mention the friction of all those teeth. The ideal would be to use a single large gear, but this would have a large diameter and the engine would be too big. That's why we see many small gears. Here, I think the connecting rods would have a similar weight. And as for the balance, initially the system was implemented in the wheels of steam locomotives, making many of them provide traction. And since they're attached to two or more wheels, it makes the behavior of the connecting rods circular, making it easy to balance with the counterweight that we see incorporated. By placing the counterweight on both shafts, the vibrations could be neutralized. The Ultramax has the thermal expansion system, but today, with the use of hydraulic lifters, these would compensate for the valve regulation immediately. Now, comparing the Ultramax to the belt clearly weighs much less. It's flexible and silent, which gives better ride comfort. But the downside is that it wears out and has a shorter lifespan. In an effort to improve efficiency, several manufacturers have fitted wet belts. This reduces friction, but occasionally fuel is forced through the rings into the oil and contaminates it. This fuel then attacks the rubber belt and it quickly degrades. The residue then clogs the oil sucker and so on, causing catastrophic engine failure. And finally, we have the last competitor, the chain. The chain is flexible and durable, but it's also somewhat noisier. It involves the use of sprockets and contacts like in a gear. It also involves guides and tensioners that rub and wear out, and it's also somewhat sensitive to the presence of fuel in the oil, and in extreme cases, it can stretch several millimeters until the tensioner runs out. They're clearly better than belts, but you still need to inspect them. Personally, I think that the rod system is very interesting. It has its advantages, such as being silent, not wearing out, being light and precise, and if special aluminum alloys or perhaps carbon fiber were used, the system would be even better. This could be a solution to wet belts. I hope automakers will consider studying this system. But a very important drawback would be that when lowering the cylinder head, the connecting rods become too long. The thermal expansion system may not be enough to compensate for this. Also, in large engines such as trucks, when using long connecting rods, the expansion could be too much to cause it to seize. An Oldham coupling could be used to solve these problems. Another interesting timing system is that of the Mercedes-Benz DB600, where these shafts are used with gears at 90 degrees. It's even possible to use the gear with the necessary reduction so that the camshaft rotates at 50%. What's your opinion? Which one do you like the most? The reliable gears, the well-known chain, the silent and economical belts, or now that you know, the Ultramax rod system? Do you have a new favorite? Comment and leave your super thanks. You can also share the channel with your friends. My name is Francis, and I'll see you in the next video.